それは時間ですフィルムクラブパプカの顔He can see the感情それは時間ですフィルムクラブ You're late, dude.
About time.
Sorry. Patrick.
Alright, we're done.
Welcome to the 6th episode of Film Club, the first anime edition. Today we're going to be talking about Akira, 1988 film by Otomo. This was my pick, and the first time I saw this film was actually last year in an anime class with some of the other people in this room. I was blown away by it, I guess just by the scale and the epic nature of this film, as well as some of the smaller elements, or I guess not really smaller elements, but just different film elements like the music, the limited animation, which was a theme we talked about in that anime class, how they wouldn't make as many frames, but they'd make each frame count, which was a really cool thing that anime in general does and what differentiates it from other animation. And yeah, so those are some reasons why I love this film, just basic reasons, but I guess we'll go around in a circle. And first, I'll introduce everyone in our chat tonight. We have two new people to Film Club. We have Christine, and we have Lucas as well, both film students at Western, and we have returning Andrei and Josh. Awesome. Alright, so let's get started. I want to hear your thoughts on the film. I guess we will start. Let's start with Josh, because you were in the anime class with us.
All right.
And you have seen this. I know you've been reviewing your notes from that class. So
yeah, for sure.
So I want to hear your general thoughts on the film.
All right.
Go
general
as
thoughts.
General or into details
okay.
You want.
Well, I loved Akira. I've seen it 4 times. Not gonna lie, it's one of my favorite anime movies. I thought they did a great job with the way they used the limited animation to make it feel like it's a very cinematic film. I think it's a great film. It's got a lot of elements of postmodernism in it, and it also has a lot of references to spirituality and politics as well, so I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Nice. Let's go Andre.
Yeah, I'm pretty stunned and blown away by this movie every time I see it, or every time I see it. I think it's my 3rd time seeing it, and I'm glad I don't watch this movie like so often. I see it like every few years, because every time I just get to feel the gravity of it. It combines this. It's a very fresh take on apocalypse. This idea of like what could destroy us and what is or isn't destroying us. And basically I thought every element of this movie lined up quite perfectly. It's one of the greatest films I'll ever see. And one thing I also really like is it was made in 88, and I don't find myself wanting it to be updated in any way. Like nothing about the animation. I'm just like, yeah, like it has its own charm, and the themes and the feelings that you get from the movie are so deep. You don't want something like new and shiny out of it.
Definitely.
Awesome. Yeah. Thoughts, Lucas?
This was actually the first anime I've ever seen. So I think it was a good introduction into the genre. I definitely agree with what Josh was saying. I can definitely say it's very cinematic, but at its core, it's not a complicated film. Some of it was jarring, I think, because because it was my first introduction into anime, particularly when Akira comes out and everything kind of becomes
culminates.
It's
Shouldn't it be jarring for anybody?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, get it? Because Akira's in a jar.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
Peanut butter.
Yeah. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed the film, and I'm looking forward to seeing some more anime.
That's good to hear.
Awesome.
All right, Christine, thoughts?
Okay, well, this is like, I've seen this movie a bunch of times. I've enjoyed it every single time.
Oh, hey, Christian.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Yeah. Okay. I see how it is.
So you were saying.
This is this movie a bunch of times. Makes it easier, dude. A bunch of times. And
Jeff Goldblum wafers.
yeah. And I had watched a lot of anime previously when I was younger before seeing this, and it was the first example of something that I had seen in that genre that was anything but like childish, that would brought like real adult themes to the table, that was not just like cutesy and fun, and that like was a big deal for me because it showed me what this genre could do. It wasn't like a kid's thing. It's kind of like when you read newspaper comics and you read your first graphic novel and you're like, whoa, there's actual stories and themes going on. And I really like it because I think at the core of it, it's not even a movie about superpowers. I don't think it's necessarily about science and the government. There's all these themes that are intertwining, but I think in the end it's just about these people, like these kids, trying to navigate this apocalypse, this crazy apocalyptic like world falling apart. And I don't even think that the world falling apart for them is necessarily like Neo Tokyo being destroyed. I think it's just their own worlds. They're also isolated. They're all orphans. I think the concept of family is very interesting, and the fact that it is absent. And yeah, I feel like there's so many layers. It's really easy just to go deeper into it.
There are tons of layers. That's a good segue too, because I feel like at its core, actually, it is about a lot of different things. It tackles socio-political, spiritual ideas, as well as what I feel at its core it is a story about maturation, like a coming of age story. And there are tons of examples of how Tetsuo is having this really rough like maturation phase. He's experiencing all these growing pains even before he starts developing the superpowers. But there's all these weird moments when he's in the hospital. I think it's probably the second time that he's brought in. It is actually. And he's having these dreams, and all these toys come to life, right? And that's the prophetic children acting as those toys. And to me, that's like his childhood, and he's rejecting his childhood. He's rejecting childhood in general. There's all this milk. It's like flooded with milk, which is really weird. And then the kids see blood. They see his blood because he cuts his foot, and they start freaking out. And blood was like this recurring theme, and red, the color of blood, being a recurring theme. Like it kind of represents, I think, power and like just pure power.
Which I think is interesting.
Kaneda has the red motorcycle, super independent, all red suit, everything, right? The coolest guy, the most, I guess you could say,
he's idolized.
He's idolized
by
the leader of their gang.
Right. He's the leader of their gang. He's right. Red is like dominant and the most adult, I guess. And like the real world is not about milk anymore, or the adult world isn't about milk, the fluid of choice.
Something that's
blood.
nurturing, right?
So my general thoughts on the film is I love it. Because there are all these different layers, and I have to say, today was my 4th time watching it, and it might have been the most enjoyable time as well.
Yeah, I actually do want to stick with that theme of colors, because I think that is something that's very big deal to the film. We were talking about earlier the red being the color of maturity and stuff, and it's definitely very powerful.
Maturity in that world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting
survival.
that you talk about Kaneda's outfit, and we do talked to Bill about Tetsuo's kind of
He's Canadian.
idolization of Kaneda,
Canadian.
and I think it's interesting at the end when he grabs his flag. It's a red flag, and it's and I think it's
Oh, the
interesting.
cape?
The cape.
Yeah.
and
That's a moment
covers,
that he gets empowered too.
his arm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the
I'm a
same time-
superhero. It's with the red cape.
But at the same
Yeah.
time, he rips it. It's tattered. It's torn, and he's using it to cover up what we may say would be his weakness. His
Right.
body is losing control, and that for him is a weak point. And the Japanese honor cannot be weak. That kind of young, kind of trope that in a lot of like Eastern and Japanese media we see about like needing to become strong, like not willing to show weakness. I think that's a big part of that. In effect, that's kind of a bravado. Like this big, like it's just a red flag. It's not a jacket. It's not a shirt. It's just a piece of cloth, and it's torn and it's tattered. And I think that using that to cover that weakness is an interesting use of it, especially because it gets out of control.
Right.
He loses it completely.
Mm-hmm.
And that especially stands out against that really not washed out, I'll say, but the more bland color palette of the film for a lot of the other characters that aren't in the gangs, like the civilians and the cops and stuff like that.
A lot of browns and dark puke
Gray,
greens
especially after the near the opening scene when they have the motorcycle chase with the sliding animation of the city, which is beautiful. Black.
I love that sliding anime. It's so
Yeah,
like simple,
it's so
but
good.
you wouldn't change it. It's just
Yeah.
art,
No.
right?
Blacks, yellows, reds, oranges, these really strong colors that kind
Hot colors.
of hot that evoke this, especially when the buildings and you're driving towards them that evoke this power, but they're not red.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a cityscape that's red at all unless it's burning.
No, it isn't, and that's like a good point. If we keep with like the color palette and when we talk about general color palettes, most of the movie takes place during the night, right? And we can.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into a comparison between what's at day and at night, but whenever you see the three like elder baby children, there's always the blue tinge, the darkness of it, right? And it's just kind of like this calm and soft color. And then whenever there's action and danger or whatever it is, it's usually lit by an explosion, or there's the kind of side. I really love the neo-noir feeling of it too. It's so good. Cyberpunk noir.
Yeah.
So Andre, final thoughts.
So if I could fuse something Pat and I said both about the soundtrack, we'll have an intersection between elemental and tribal, and that is Pat rubbing my foot. No, we'll say that it's primal. It has such a primal force. There's a beat and a rhythm to it that carries you around, sweeps you away, washes you over, and then this was honestly the most emotional I've ever gotten after this movie, where I had to go. I went upstairs and it was just still, like, I felt almost hollowed out by it. I just had to like sit for 15 or 20 minutes and digest it, where you're confronted with the enormity and the kind of incomprehensibility of the universe, yet somehow there has to be a beginning and there has to be an end to it. And that's the movie in a nutshell.
And then it restarts.
Yeah, it starts again. Right?
It ends. The credits are literally a big bang, like the creation of the new universe. All right, Lucas, this was your first anime film that you've ever seen. Final thoughts.
I definitely enjoyed it, and I think the biggest scene for me in the film was, you mentioned it, the scene when he's in the hospital and then the children pretend to be signifiers of childhood.
Yeah.
The car and the bear.
The car, the bear,
the bunny, I believe.
the bunny.
And I think the most important part of that for me is when he recoils and he falls backward and then the wall collapses, and it proves that it shows that it's just Legos, and it just shows how fragile our world really is, and also ties into the incomprehensibility of it, where we don't have the foundation. We don't have the foundation to be able to understand it, and that's why Teseo, that's why he reacts the way he does to the power. Like, the children tell him that you shouldn't be reacting this way, but he doesn't have the foundation to be able to understand what he's doing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. To us, this world is so real and material and adult, but to the mind of God, all the basic elements of this world are just toys. Right? And Tetsuo treats it kind of like, you know, when kids will treat toys, they'll break them, they'll eat them, and things like that. They just don't see it as the concrete objects that they're supposed to be. Right?
Yeah.
Or as serious and mature that you're supposed to be.
Yeah. So I was just going to give my final thoughts, just because I was like, all right, this is going to tie into mine. I really feel like Akira is a brilliant, layered story and film about coming of age. Not just how Tetsuo, the character, is coming of age, but how kind of humanity is coming of age. Like, we've developed all this power and we're not really ready to use it yet. What do we do? And it was just kind of interesting as you were talking about the children in the hospital, like they're kind of like little wizards. It reminded me of, actually, in Tetsuo in general as a character, reminds me a lot of Anakin Skywalker. There are a lot of parallels there, which I want to tie in.
Definitely a lot of Star Wars influence into the movie.
For sure. So those little kids, I guess, you know, the little magical, spiritual telepaths, right? Empaths. Yeah, Benjamin Button looking ass motherfuckers. Are like Jedis. And remember when Anakin Skywalker becomes a Jedi, there's all this debate. He's too young. He's too young. Or no, he's too old.
He's too old. Yeah.
You have to learn this from a young age and stuff because you'll mature with it. Whereas he's coming into this with his very fragile past and troubled past, just like Tetsuo is coming into it. And then let's see what happens. He just gets all this power all of a sudden, right? He hasn't been sort of nurtured into it. And another thing that happens to Tetsuo, he loses his right arm. What happens to Anakin Skywalker? He loses his right arm and creates a robotic one, just like Tetsuo does. I heard someone say that's the loss of Anakin Skywalker's righteousness at that point. That's what it symbolizes. To me, it doesn't symbolize the loss of Tetsuo's righteousness because he didn't really have any righteousness, because Neo-Tokyo as a world is just kind of hedonistic and not righteous, and he wasn't righteous when he had his power at all. Whereas you could say Anakin was a Jedi. He was on the side of the light for a little bit. To me, the loss of his right arm symbolizes the loss of his control, his grasp, any grasp that he had of his power. Because after that, either the power takes over or the machinery with the power just takes over and becomes a disease. This just all-consuming amoebic force. And yeah, just to wrap it up, love it. I've said this probably like 28 times. I love the music in it. I will watch this again.
God feed us.
Many times. All right. So yes. So you've spoken. Lucas has spoken. Josh, thoughts?
All right. Well, I think everybody's pretty much covered a lot of what I was gonna say, but definitely, like, I love the movie, and I thought it was great. Like, one of my favorite themes in the movie is just this whole cycle of destruction and how destruction can create something new. I think it's shown up so many times in the film, like just as you were saying, where Tetsuo actually creates his own new arm and had to be destroyed before that happened. Just like the beginning of the film starts off with this giant explosion, which is kind of like symbolic for the Big Bang. It happens at the end of the film as well. Same with Neo-Tokyo. Neo-Tokyo is a city that was created after the original Tokyo was destroyed. Just thought it was a great film. Yeah, for sure.
Those are great points. I like how you tied in those themes. All right, Christine, finish us off.
Best for last. I still love it after this discussion. And I think that
good.
And
I wasn't sure.
After this beer,
it's I love
still
it.
pretty good.
I love it.
Still
even
good
more.
movie.
But I think that we've all talked about great things about the movie, and I think that something else to address would be its. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Its influence and how much it has influenced so much media around it, and past it. It's good beer.
Getting Mike Sorcerer.
And just kind of how much like I think that we can take from it, even just as mere mortals, that kind of stuff. I think that, like I said in the beginning, while it's a very fantastical, kind of biblical and proportion sense of a movie, I do still believe that a lot of it is still these people trying to navigate this mythical kind of puberty, this growing up through life, and trying to navigate in this, in the way that I'm sure all teenagers feel at some point in this world. It's just terrible. It sucks, and I just have to get through it. And if I had a sweet motorcycle, I'd probably be doing better. But I think that being at its core is something that makes it, that it could be that without all the other elements, and I still think it would be like, a good story, that kind of hero's journey, that maturation that turns sour.
The anti-hero's journey.
A little bit, like a little.
The villain's journey.
It's a postmodern epic.
Yeah,
right.
and I think that of all of those, because around Akira, there's been dozens, hundreds of these kind of stories people are telling me to do. I think that this movie is one of the best examples of that, possibly the best example of that. That genre being turned
so
into
epic, right?
Just that kind of classic hero's journey. That Luke Skywalker, but it's Tetsuo being twisted and turned into something that I think is very emblematic of like what postmodernism is in media and what people maybe expect from it, which is, I think, this kind of techno babble junk mixing with this kind of very pure flesh-like power at the end. Akira's exploding, all that stuff. We have all these things together, and I think that in itself is very, I think summarizes the movie and what it's trying to do very well. And I really like it. I think it's great.
Awesome.
Super.
All right.
Awesome.
So, Akira is biblical.
Biblical as shit.
If you haven't seen it and we just spoiled it for you, you should watch
You
it
should have
anyways, because I just watched it for the 4th time today. I knew what was going to happen, and it was amazing.
You can't
It's been
just
out
watch
since
it
1988.
It's been out since 1988. What are you doing?
What have you been doing for 30 years?
Oh.
Almost.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Lucas is just sidling away.
No, Lucas is like, what have I been doing for 30 years?
Anyone have anything else to say?
See it.
Sign off?
See it now.
Yeah, see this movie immediately.
Watch it today.
Akira!
Canada!
Oh, Canada.
Excellent.
That's what I'm talking about.